I think your opinion of things, who you are, and that translated into your work is really one of the most important things. So you never get lost amongst everybody. That you look at your drawing, it's you.
And you stay true.
And you stay true to that, and you work on really defining who you are in your art.
Can you really think of a more noteworthy animator in recent years than Genndy Tartakovsky? Well, of course, you've got your share of Matt Groening's. It really cannot be understated that of all the creatives in the cartoon sphere, Genndy is perhaps the most diverse in his productions. And in spite of the varied number of projects he's worked on, he has always retained a distinct artistic fingerprint. No matter how big the production, Genndy's visual flair is always present. From Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, and the frantic animation of the Hotel Transylvania movies, and then the brutality of Primal and Samurai Jack. You may not have known it was him who was behind them all, but you could tell a creative auteur was the connective tissue tying all these series together. While I'll admit it's hard to argue that Genndy isn't a genius when it comes to creative direction, it becomes genuinely difficult to defend the way he often ends his stories. This weakness is rooted in the fact that he got into animation purely for the love of the craft. I mean, we're talking about a guy who had others animate for him that he entirely reanimated himself on his spare time while at home off of work.
Crazy the benefits you get out of kind of doing something for free sometimes on your own. You just like, for Two Stupid Dogs, they did some walk cycles. They hired an animator to do it, and I didn't like it. And I redid it overnight, and then I showed my boss. He's like, wow, these are great. Here, do this animate the opening main titles.
The guy is an animator by trade and passion. He's admitted that storytelling wasn't exactly his strongest suit, and it often felt like he was bullshitting his way through it. You can clearly see this with his Hotel Transylvania movies. They're visually stunning with their crazy animation, but the stories themselves feel hollow and uninspired. Much of the online reviews seem to reflect this, even if many people still gush about the animation style.
Hey everyone, sorry for the interruption. If you enjoy videos like this outside of my loved versus hated series, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like and leave a comment. Specifically, let me know about how you feel about the finales that Genndy Tartakovsky has written. Do you think they're rushed, or do you think they're actually just fine, and I'm off base? Regardless of how you may agree or disagree with me on that, comments and likes, but specifically comments, help with the algorithm and showing my channel some love. And if you'd like to support me in making more of these specific videos by going the extra mile, consider buying me a coffee. The link's in the description. It truly means the world to me. Thank you so much, guys.
In fact, just about every one of his projects have been cursed by some pretty odd writing choices in the later arcs. Perhaps it was the way he stepped away from Dexter's Lab, allowing it to fall into painful mediocrity, or how Sym-biotic Titan and Unicorn Warriors Eternal just kind of exist. For the sake of not doing what every single YouTuber in history does to extend a video, I'm gonna spare you the full details of this man's varied history, from his early beginnings in Russia to his moving to America. And while he's had more wins than losses, there's a mounting sense that the man just can't write an ending to save his life. Nowhere is this more prevalent than the series Samurai Jack and Primal. In a time when action animation in the West was in vogue, Genndy took things to another level. See, it wasn't enough for Genndy just to make his simple samurai show. No, he had to tell a story of a samurai sent into the far-off future to undo the evil of the great late Mako's character, Aku. What followed were 4 seasons of some of the hardest-hitting action animation your childhood brain likely has ever set eyes on. Each episode would often follow a similar plot loop. Jack finds a method of returning to the past, meets somebody wildly designed and interesting, Aku outplays him, and Jack ends up back at square one, either due to losing to Aku in battle or his own sense of honor, often saving people instead of returning to the past. If this were any other show, most people probably would have checked out. I mean, this was some strategic edging I hadn't experienced in ages. You swear this guy was never gonna get back to the past. But Genndy's sense of visual direction was just that good. I mean, look at all of these frames. This is a children's show, and yet he took it above and beyond. While I could gush about a series forever, the issue really comes to when the show was cancelled out of the blue. Fast forward to 2017, and Adult Swim officially picks up the series again. To conclude, for all of us 30-year-old boomers who've been waiting to see if he could actually finally get back to the past, we were frothing at the mouth to see the titular Samurai Jack finally go back. And this time, just like us, he'd aged up, matured, and grown a sense of dread. Oh god. Let's just say this wasn't your 5 p.m. Samurai Jack on Cartoon Network, where they strategically had him face off against robots to keep things PG. No, he was absolutely obliterating creatures and humans alike with full blood on display. Did it live up to the hype? Well, that really depends on who you ask. The first handful of episodes with the Daughters of Aku, absolutely peak. Getting to see old characters like the Scotsman return? Kino. After the Daughters' defeat, Genndy likely wanted to take the show back to its more adventurous roots, fun and more lighthearted. And hey, I had no issue with that. I certainly liked Jack's new look, but I understood the importance of him returning to his clean-cut, cartoony design. That said, what followed was some of the cringiest forced romance I've ever been forced to watch.
Ashi, you're naked!
What were they thinking?
I mean, genuinely, I was embarrassed as the series tried to convince us that this woman, who had just been spending episodes before that training to murder and kill Jack in cold blood, suddenly fell in love with him. I could believe him being a father figure of some sort, but this just felt like an insult to the viewer, and I am far from the only person to complain about this. This is where you started to see much of Genndy's issues in his storytelling. He involves so many plot lines and characters that he writes himself into a corner where realistically, he can't address all of them. He seriously needs an editor to help him hone his finales, or at the very least, scale back the number of characters and plot lines he introduces, because Genndy is a passionate animator whose goal from day one of Samurai Jack was to have as little story as possible with more emphasis on style and action.
And I told him about what I wanted to do, kind of the bare bones. I wanted to do a really highly stylized action show with maybe simple stories, but like with 15 minutes of fighting. And he goes, "That sounds great, let's do it."
And of course, with more action means more set pieces and characters, to the point in which it actually hinders him in writing his stories. Hell, this was so much of an issue, they felt the need to inject a brand new ending for the series in the tie-in video game they released a couple years after. Almost like he was aware that writing off Aku's daughter as both a plot device and a contrived romance, while also deleting her, was something that wouldn't gel well. Mind you, I personally like the original somber ending, since realistically we don't all get to live happily ever after with the love of our lives. But life doesn't also stop immediately after. Its ending was bittersweet. It was just unfortunately rushed. But this was a clear sign that Genndy needed somebody to help him edit down some things. A similar thing happened with the series Primal. He set the groundwork for the most brutal, uncompromising animated series in years just after his Samurai Jack Adult Swim animated season. Just like Samurai Jack, Primal set itself apart from all other shows by being entirely animation-centric. Little to no dialogue, just grunts and characters emoting. And for a season and a half, that worked for the most part. I mean, how could it go wrong? How could Genndy ruin that, right? No writing needed for dialogue? I mean, come on. The man was 100% finally in his element and just showing visual storytelling. However, yet again, Genndy's old habits reared their ugly head. By introducing more human characters from alternate histories, the show created genuinely cool world building that felt both familiar and unique. But with this came Genndy's old issue of overstuffing his stories. Episodes like The Colossus Part 2, and The Colossus Part 3, lovingly known as the Queen Bitch arc, took perhaps a little too long to conclude. And where most shows like this would typically try not to overdo it with side plots and side characters, he doubled down, especially with the spin-off episode Primal Theory, which I personally loved. But it certainly felt like the show was unnecessarily stuffing itself when it was just about to wrap up. Because of this, we ended up getting a revenge arc that was quickly dealt with in an incredibly unceremonious way. The lead burned to a crisp, and yet again, another rushed relationship, this time quite literally to set up a new season or story. The final scene with Spirit and Mira though, oh god. Again, if you were to write the endings of both Primal and Samurai Jack down on paper for me, I wouldn't bat an eye. I don't need an ending to be happy. I don't even need some epic Sakuga-filled battle between the show's leads for the show to be ended well. I mean, it helps, and while I still think both shows hold up perfectly in spite of their endings, I sadly don't feel motivated to rewatch them anytime soon with anyone because of just how unsatisfying they ended. I mean, when you have shows like The Owl House that were actually forced to finish within like a handful of little TV movie episodes and then a full season of a show of Primal and Samurai Jack, it just feels weird that where that show can end in a way that feels emotionally impactful and satisfying, despite some quick hang-ups here and there in terms of speeding up the writing, it just feels unfortunate that they couldn't end the same way. And while they weren't insulting, they both just ended in a way that felt so empty, it retroactively makes you forget how good the shows were in the first place. At least for me. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Genndy, to me, is a artistic genius. I just think, like George Lucas was helped by his wife in the editing to save his first film, Genndy should look to having another editor help him finish his stories. Maybe even have somebody entirely else just write the ending for him with a little bit of his production help in the background. Otherwise, he's just gonna continue to make shows that leave a legacy of disappointment. But I still love these series, so take that with a grain of salt when I say that. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.